question from Deep, and he covered some of the possibilities and potential of generative AI. So I'll start off with a kind of an oddball curveball question, and from you, Deepmar and Brideshwar, I want to understand. So in your wildest dreams, what is the biggest potential that you see from generative AI, and how it can if you had no restrictions, no just all the positive aspects, and what is it that you see and how it could revolutionize either your industry or your profession or in general? So just go wild, just dream big. What is the biggest potential that you see?
Thank you. It's obviously a very interesting question because given it's so new, everybody is obviously thinking about where can this go, where is it going, but also where don't you want it to go, right? So I think there's also lots of things that we're seeing that is potentially scaring a lot of us, like yesterday some of the voice things that people are doing and how they're taking YouTube videos of people and they're mimicking your voice, and then they can access your bank account by mimicking your voice through voice recognition. So there's obviously many things that are also scaring people, but one has to look through that and beyond that and see really what is the opportunity and what are the benefits that you can get from this. One of the sayings that I heard somebody say that really resonated for me, and this is sort of more in the short term, this is not necessarily long term where it's going to go, but one thing that this really enables for you is that it gives you access to an unlimited number of really cheap interns. And I think that's something that lots of organizations can leverage. As I said, this is not really the end state goal, but a lot of companies that have a lot of manual tasks, a lot of repetitive tasks that need to be performed, this really gives you the power to automate and really build a scale business. We sort of a digital banking player that's trying to compete with many established players, and some of them sitting next to me. But for us, it's really a cost play. We don't have the balance sheets that they have, and this really gives us an ability to compete with limited resources. We see it as an ability to help us level the playing field and compete.
Your thoughts?
No, I'll give you a very quick short answer which is steeped in pop culture. Dream scenario, Jarvis from Iron Man, and obviously to echo what you said, we would not want is Skynet from Terminator.
Very, very good, short and sweet. So, and I'm kind of going to the opposite end, to Sachin and Damien. So what is your worst nightmare with this technology? So what would be your, like, hey, we have generative AI, what is the worst nightmare?
I think I'll keep it very short as well. So basically, the nightmare is, can we trust it?
And then you?
Yeah, my nightmare is probably my kids utilising it to the point where they stop learning and they rely on the technology too much without free thinking and innovating and being creative. So for me, actually getting them to do art manually rather than through a computer, learning the guitar, doing things that still embody that creativity, I think is a way to also combat that. But my biggest fear is that people rely on it too much and get lazy. Yeah.
So maybe let me double click on this creativity aspect a little bit. So I think you mentioned a little about lower cost. You have like an army of interns, and you can do a lot of the work that previously was very manual and laborious. So in a society or in a technology where the cost of doing a certain kind of creative work goes down, how do you think, in terms of jobs to be done, what role humans would have to play and how we have to evolve in terms of doing those roles? So if creativity becomes very easy to achieve, a certain level of creativity, then what is it that we humans can actually do? Maybe you can.
Yeah, so my philosophy really is that we should use AI to augment human decision making, right? So human in the loop, human over the loop, or in the center of the decision making. And I think it's really important for organizations to embrace some form of a framework. And for us, explainability, transparency, privacy and trust, auditability, fairness to remove bias, and also life cycle management with that entire process, so that they're continually evolving that policy and that internal adoption of AI is really important. But I think, if you have, for me, a really huge benefit of AI is really making sense of a lot of data super fast to drive that insight through to the organization. But with that, you have to assume that that data is trustworthy as well. So for me, the fundamentals that we architect things correctly, we pull the data sources in correctly, we trust the data that we're interfacing into the machine learning algorithms and the AI interfaces is absolutely critical. But then at the end of that cycle, once we've applied AI to that data that we trust, that we've ensured is accurate, that we've tried to train to be non-biased, etc. If we have a human in the loop that can make a final decision, then I think that's the ideal. I don't think, for me, in terms of that creativity, we should really lose that human touch in the whole. I think we've taken it too far if we allow AI to make the decisions for us, because we all know that the Skynet principles and everything else. I don't think that's too far away, and I think it will potentially happen for some things. But I think right now, let's ensure philosophically that we're still building humans in the loop with that decision-making process, and that's how we maintain that speed, that efficiency, cost reduction, and also generate some element of human creativity as well.
I think very good point about keeping human in the loop. Anyone else had some perspective on, from your experience of how you've thought in your own work or industry, like how you could use human in the loop with generative AI?
So maybe I can give a real use case example, right? So I think Deep also mentioned about creation of JDs and all. So I think what we are doing in our area as well, we are actually trying to bring operational efficiency in the recruitment process of the HR. If you look at the scale of government at WOG level, which is whole of government, right? There are approximately 80 or 90,000 kind of applications on a year basis which is coming up. So what we are trying to do is using GenAI and the application screening processes that can we actually identify the top applicants for a particular job, and at the same time, for example, if a data engineer has applied for a data scientist, can we actually identify that the person who has applied is not a good data scientist but is a very, very good data engineer, and then it allows the HR recruitment or have the talent pipeline that if you don't have it. So I think what we are trying to do is, again, we are enabling this recruitment process using GenAI to bring that operational efficiency, taking out the monotonous work of scanning through each and every CV, summarizing the CV, giving the recommendation. Again, the final decision is as a human touch, right? We are just trying to reduce the whole process. At the end of the day, is a human call, whether the output of the model, the scoring mechanism, everything is very transparent, whether the recruitment or hiring manager agrees with it. If not, then its override capability is there. So I think I totally agree what Imin has mentioned, that the process of optimizing with a human touch is something which we should be aiming for.
Maybe sort of a real life example that we've implemented in a company is, we obviously do a digital bank and we're launching new products and new features all the time. So one of the big focus areas for us is content generation, getting that message out into the market. And what previously used to happen is that our content generations, they had to come up with everything from start to finish, and they were completely overwhelmed, and it was all about just getting text out, getting text out, getting text out. And they couldn't really strategically think about, how do I want to position this, what are the psychological triggers I want to speak to, or when we nudge customers, etc., etc. Now we've enabled a tool for them that generates copy for them in our tone and in the right shape and format, and whether or not it's a tweet or an SMS, an email, they can now use that to do a lot of the bulk work to get the sort of text generated, and they can now be the editors and really think about what are the things we want to emphasize, how do we want to position it, and they can use these tools to generate that for them. So initially there was quite pushback and they were nervous that this tool is going to take their job away from them, but they're actually enjoying their jobs a lot more now, and they get a lot more satisfaction because they can actually do the strategic thinking and then just get the machine to help them to do a lot of the volume play. So for us, that's been a huge win. We actually get a lot more content out than what we used to. Plus, the people that are generating that content were responsible for that, actually enjoying their job a lot more because they can actually think about what they're doing now versus we're just completely overwhelmed and we're just producing content just to get things into the market.
Let's jump a little bit and talk a bit about two of the issues which I think some of you touched about. So one is around bias, so especially in a context like you mentioned around HR and applying. I mean, it's always very sensitive, right? You want to make sure that you are unbiased. And I mean, I get the fact of like you want to keep a human in the loop, but I want to understand from the panel, what are some of the other things you can do in order to systemically, address bias when we use this technology? If perhaps you could share some experiences or process or so on. And in particular, when we are, either leveraging or using some of the open APIs or, models which are public, right? So we don't be trained on the wide internet, right? So maybe Pradesh, you can talk about it.
Bias, Gen AI technically is not very different from our traditional AI models as well, except that the scale and scope of data is of a very different level. Now, in the short term, I think the only way we will be able to address that is we constantly streamline and filter the data inputs wherever we can. There are challenges in that, especially on where the models are external, because the explainability is currently very low, which is exactly where the human intervention comes in. So, which is why, if you see the broad areas where most organizations are deploying this right now, are more in the non-regulated, non-decision-making, process efficiency, human oversight areas. So bias, two things: what kind of information is going in to train that model? To the extent you can control that, you control that, but to the extent you can't, you have to have that filters that you're building in. And even when it comes to bias, I have a slightly contrarian view there. I think the models will have bias, the humans will have an oversight on that. But there is bias in real life anyways, right? The example that I keep going back to is, as humans, it's embedded in how we do and how we act. And we actively choose information sources that reinforce those biases. If I'm in the US and I'm a Republican, I'm only watching Fox News. If I'm a Democrat, I'm only watching CNN or MSNBC. So I think you're automatically feeding information that plays to the kind of information you need. To this point, we're essentially trying to come up with use cases that are simplifying productivity, right? So these are news sources I go after. I'm just going to filter through them. I'm going to summarize them, and I'm going to act on them. When we get into decision making, credit decisioning, when we get into fraud decisioning and all of that, in an automated sense, that is where once these models evolve and we have a lot more explainability, those things will come in.
Yeah, and I think just adding to that, I think we've taken the approach to use a federated learning model using inferences from different sources. So the way that our modeling kind of works to infuse decision making is you've got a global model that you effectively have, and it's a large language model that sends inferences to a local language model, and that local language model is learning the nuances in that region and infusing the global learning model with that. And you've also got tenant-based customer inferences that are also influencing that from a user perspective. So you've got kind of three elements that you're building in. On top of that, we've got a system where we've got automated learning. So we automatically feed a lot of data to the platform all the time from these three effectively systems. So it's always changing, it's always adapting, and through the human in the loop philosophy, the customers have always got the ability to reject the answer or not go with the answer. And I'll use a very simple example, and this is what we're seeing a lot of as organizations try and adapt, is moving to a skills-based economy. So when you think about automating HR decisions, trying to find the right resources, when you convert individuals in an organizations to look at the skills that they have, so it could be a programmer, they may have programming skills in Java or in Python or whatever, but they also might be skilled in UX. It might be a human-centered design facilitator as an example. So you build out a skills profile for that person. through having a skills profile, you can then look at the skills that you need, the skills that you want to develop in an organization, also the skills that you're looking for in new candidates. And if you move to that type of model for people where you're actually dynamically associating skills with a profile, that's a great thing to use machine learning and AI for, right? So for me, it's also about reverse engineering the problems that you have, the things that you're trying to solve for, and applying the right technology in the right way. But then you're able to sort of force rank candidates as they come through, depending on the skills that you've got, etc. So, you know, for me, it's about having the ability to federate the machine learning models, to bring in different sources, and dynamically tune that all the time throughout the life cycle of that decision making, and also applying the technology where it's best suited. Because generative AI is not good at everything, right? Yeah, it's very, very good at some things. So you need to be really cautious about where you apply the technology.
I think those are very good points, and I at least first time I'm hearing about the thing that you mentioned about having a global model and having, you know, other LLMs to do the local inferencing in a federated way. So I think that's also a very good point. Now, one final question before we, you know, I cognizant of the time, go to the audience is, so maybe Sachin, you can talk. So when it comes to use of, you know, generative image models, there's a lot of concern in enterprises around copyright, right? Especially when it comes to US, right? I would like to ask, I would like flip it around and say like, hey, what is it that you would expect in terms of regulation or actually clarity on some of these laws that would actually increase adoption for enterprises? Is there something that you have in mind? Tough question.
Yeah, I think I was not mentally prepared for this, and we strike the deal that you're not going to ask me the tough one. Yeah. Tough ones are for these three. But yeah, actually, to be very honest, my experience with the regulations, whether it is GDPR, PDPA, right? Regulations do set up a high-level framework, but it doesn't give you a clarity, right? It's not always a very clear direction from a regulations side. Even if you look at a GDPR, right? Even if you look at records destruction clauses in GDPR, it is actually not stated very clearly what kind of, you know, what should be the frequency. It's not very black and white, right? It's always left on the interpretation of the people who are implementing it, which is again a very gray area for me. My view is that especially in the Gen AI, when it has been so much kind of looked upon, I think regulations has a very high responsibility to actually articulate the regulations in a more black and white and transparent way, and offer some kind of clarity on how to implement it and how to protect. Because if Gen AI has to be successful, regulations has to play their part in a more aggressive and proactive way.
Makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think if I just take it one level higher, right? I think when we just talk about Gen AI, and we're talking about three broad areas. I mean, you can talk about client consent around the data, number one. Second is obviously the IP and, you know, getting data that's behind a paywall. And third, again, you have, you know, deep fakes and all of that. Now, honestly, and I don't mean to flippant about it, but I don't see these as huge challenges as these things stabilize and evolve. I think, again, the creator of the problem is also giving us the tools to create the solutions and the controls around that. So if we take that one by one, right? If I just take the consent part, right now, of course, the models put everything on the internet. They've started out, they've just shown the power of it. Most of us are not starting and taking that right away and adopting through that. As we start deploying these at scale, we will be asking the same set of principles and questions that we've been asking so far. And I do believe that first on consent, we already, all of us, it's not a new topic. It's been around for the last 7 or 10 years. There are strong regulations in place, especially in regulated sectors like the financial services. And I do feel that we already have good embedded controls around that. And I'm not really saying that because we have somebody from the government on the stage. So I think, of course, regulations will evolve, our controls will evolve, but I think consent is something that we will be able to solve for, number one. Second, deepfakes, yes, absolutely, it is a concern. But I again feel that there is positive conversations around, you know, watermarking all Gen AI created content. And while it's still a little fuzzy right now, I think over time you will have industry standard protocols for such content, which will create that traceability. Like you have, you know, on a website, you have HTTPS for the more secure sites. And of course, the other dodgy sites will continue to exist as well. Lastly, again, you know, about IP and stuff behind paywall, I again don't see those as major challenges because in the short, over time you will be able to build out those filters to take out any copyrighted material. And again, I think it will be a positive because you will probably end up having a framework where if some content is getting used, you will again get a micropayment kind of a solution based on usage, and it'll actually help the content creators monetize whatever they've done. So there are challenges. We have to be cognizant about it, but I'm pretty optimistic that we'll be able to solve all of those.
Yeah, I'd also say that I think we're very fortunate in Singapore in that we've got a very progressive government stance on this, right? And I think you see the battle now between, the EU and the federal sort of government sort of saying, no, we're going to be the ones that everyone's going to listen to. Hey, we had great success with GDPR, and therefore, everyone's going to follow us with the AI standards. But I do think but you look at a lot of countries and they've actually opted out of those conversations for very good reason, because they've got their own sovereignty laws, etc. So Singapore set up something called the AI Foundry, which determines a set of tools and practices that organizations can use to certify their AI strategy. And I think that is a really progressive way forward, where actually the organizations have a framework that they can adapt to, they can learn from, and also use, that's determined by the government to say, hey, if you're going to have and adopt this technology, here's some guidelines, here's some guardrails, here's some tools that you can actually use so that you can we can all progress this journey together. And it's a very collaborative approach that I think. So I think, in Singapore specifically, I think we're very fortunate to have a very progressive stance on this.
Yeah, I think just to add on to what Damien said, right, and obviously I'm not a lawyer, so check with your counsel, but I have it on good authority. So under the Singapore's Copyright Act 2021 amendment, the kind of model training that companies in the US have done, Midjourney, Stability, and so on, where they took all public internet sources and train the data, it's explicitly permitted in Singapore. So you can use any computational data procedures on public data sources as long as you obtain the data, publicly without breach. So the kind of lawsuits we're seeing in the US about copyright would not be possible here. And second, if you have done and trained a model like this, you cannot restrict access to someone else. So the clause which you know in OpenAI's API usage, which says that you cannot use our API to improve your own model, it's actually not enforceable here. So on that note, I will open up to the audience for questions. So please feel free to raise your hand, and then, yeah.
Any questions, anybody?
Hi panelists, really enjoyed the discussion. My question is for Bireshwar. I think I found your opinions very practical, optimistic as well. I agree with almost all of them. Just one question which I would love to, if you can clarify, is on the bias part, right? You spoke about privacy, very optimistic, share the same opinion. But on bias part, I understand that traditional models have always, we have suffered with bias and we're trying to solve them. With generative AI, primarily where we are at right now, and it has touched masses, is in language, right? And it is so accessible that a common man would be interacting with it, right? It's already interacting with it, and we'll be building more applications. So isn't and you would also see, sorry for the long comment plus question, but you'd also see that this would sit with, not every enterprise will have their own language model. It will sit with, a few. So now isn't the onus on the technology community, and especially on these, to make sure that the bias is resolved, because the consequences are, they're reaching masses. So, what's your viewpoint on that?
No, I think we can talk about that for hours, but if I had to just take 2 or 3 nuances of that, right? One is, a lot of the models that you're talking about are still at an early stage of they're out there. But have they been deployed at scale for practical decision making, or are they currently being used for analysis generation at an individual level, right? So chatbots being biased and racist has been around, and that's because of the information that they're fed. If the internet and humans are biased, that's the information the models have been fed on, the models are biased. When you start getting into decision making models, again, underwriting, hiring, etc., 3 things. One is there will be a lot more filtering of what parameters, what sources, etc. go in. there will always be an organizational, cultural, and regulatory overlay of acceptable parameters or not. And again, I think the models itself will help us identify biases a lot more than we would have done through human supervision. I mean, some of the work that's already happening right now is you're using GenAI to find bias within GenAI and building those controls, and you will be monitoring for that drift over a period of time in a far more automated manner. Second, as you rightly touched upon, I mean, everybody has some sense of ownership there. Regulations will drive a lot of that. Communities will drive a lot of that. And today, again, a lot of the models are based on entire data thrown in. That will get cleaned up over time. What kind of information goes in will get filtered. Consent will play a part in that. And clients, people, consumers will provide consent based on the value that they see. If somebody is able to provide a customer significantly superior services, pricing or offering, I will consent. Otherwise, I won't. All of us have apps on our phones. Every single app wants to get location services and access to data. We only give it to apps like Grab, Deliveroo or Google Maps because that helps us. If you're a random app, I will not give it to you. If you're not really solving a problem, I will not give it to you. So I think over time, it will naturally by selection, unless the quality of your offering and the sophistication of your modeling is there, you will not get access to the data anyways.
Hi, my name is Sunita. Really enjoyed the discussion. I think, Damien, you started off talking about keeping humans in the loop, and that resonates very, very deeply with me. I wanted to ask all of you, what clearly, this area requires a whole lot of, technical training, and people have to keep up with whatever is going on in the world. And I also understand that regulation takes care of a lot of things, and you can set guardrails on how things are done. But nevertheless, there are still humans who are going to be doing these, creating these guardrails and regulations and so on. So outside of technical training, what kind of human skills are required in a community like this and in a broader, larger community so that humans continue to stay in the loop and can control this rather than let this run away and become masters?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point and a really, really good question. And I think there are some industry nuances to the answer, I think, as well. But I really liked your point. And actually, we recently did a survey of about 1,500 executives globally, and we found that 80% of those executives understood and believed that they needed to adopt an AI, a machine learning strategy in order for them to stay competitive. But conversely, 76% of those same executives realized and understood their machine learning models. 82% of all our customers have signed that agreement. 2,000 of the 10,000 customers are sharing data. Now, we give, there's around 600 fields within the software that we've developed that they can share. Now, it's up to them as to whether they share each of those 600 fields, one of those fields, or none of those fields, dependent on that. So that, by keeping the human in the loop and the human in that decision-making process, you've got the ability to understand your data strategy, define what your data policy is, and then understand from your business what you're prepared to share to make the experience of your end users more meaningful. So for me, it's really about understanding the data. It's about understanding the policy that you've got. It's also about coming up with an effective data policy that defines what type of data you're willing to put in these cycles. And then it's also about selecting partnerships effectively that can guide you along your journey to help you define what your strategy is. So, for me, I think it's an evolution. It's not a revolution. And I think if you're, in this forum here, you're clearly, of the understanding that data is absolutely critical as a foundation. I think, that the initial discussion talked about hallucinations. If you've ever used ChatGPT in the early days, it comes up with really, really confident, incorrect answers. And that's not something that you want to create in your enterprise, right? Through either going too soon or adopting the technology when the data sources that you've interfaced into these systems are not trusted, right? So for me, it's having an effective data foundation. It's ensuring that you can interface into all of your data sources. So that's really sort of the sort of benchmark. But yeah, I think it's a continual challenge. I think we need to keep ourselves educated. There's lots of, for those people in the room, there's lots of courses that are now available in, say, NTU and NUS that are on the weekends, AI and ethics and governance courses that you can do. I'm doing one right now. So I think it's up to us to continue that learning journey. But yeah, there's some fantastic free and also accessible tools available for you to continue that learning journey. But hopefully that helps.
I'm conscious of time, but I just wanted to give you my optimistic spin on that. I actually think it's great because what is happening or what will happen very soon is we are making data and technology conversational, right? We've always wanted that. We never really had the tools to do that. And what that really means is in the organization, instead of just all of us understanding what we can do and the power of all the things that we could potentially do, and we are spending half our time selling that story instead of executing that story, very, very soon, code generation, insight generation, a lot of that will essentially be in the hands of all of our business stakeholders as well. And it significantly will reduce a lot of the development cycle time. It will reduce a lot of the more basic stuff that all of us would like to really build those more advanced models, but the current need of the business is a more basic model or just access to information, access to certain data cuts, right? All of that gets automated and in the hands of people much faster. So I'm quite optimistic about all of us moving up the value chain in terms of the quality of work that we do and the value the data automatically brings. And of course, it'll take time, but one of the things I'm most optimistic about is I think the current Gen AI hype, it'll not be Gen AI in the next 1 or 2 years that will transform things, but I think Gen AI is the big wave, the tide that will lift all other AI. All of us are trying to do, I don't know where different organizations are, but even our basic investments in having the end-to-end data lifecycle pipeline in place, cloud investments in place, the data architecture in place is not fully there yet, right? Even some of the more basic ML models are not at scale. Some of our POCs are in certain parts of the businesses. I think over the next 2 to 3 years, all of that will move ahead with the right set of investments and focus.
We have time for one last question by Biswanath.
Okay. Hi, I'm Bishwa. So I'm from Finaxel. It's a fintech company in the BNPL space. So we actually work a lot on the credit scoring underwriting, right? So I think this is one of the areas where we have seen that not always the best model or the best algorithm is the best one because it is not explainable. So, in the use cases that you may have seen in the credit scoring or these kind of things, how do you ensure that if you are using Gen AI, how to teach it or how to fine tune it that it still remains explainable? Do you have any experiences or what kind of challenges?
So maybe I can just share some of the perspective maybe, and I think Bireshwar will be the right person to say because from the financial side, right? So I think from credit scoring and any kind of model, right, I think we touched in the morning as well the importance of synthetic data. See, the thing is that it's all about whether it is Gen AI or AI or whatever the model is, right? Model works on the data set we provide. What kind of, and at the same time, what kind of transparent data we can share. Even some of the models, what we are trying to do is we want to also share the data sets on which the model has been trained, just to make sure that the transparency and the ethical AI and all those things are also been looked at. So I think one of the things which you can really think about is the usage of synthetic data, where you can actually cover a lot of different scenarios. And now coming back to the bias, because I think we have discussed a lot about bias, right? I think let's accept the fact that there will be some level of bias, and I think if we start claiming that model will be completely bias free, I don't think so that's a right way or right statement to make. But I think I just want to complement that with, if the models are able to explain or justify why the prediction or why this kind of output is coming out, whether it is wrong, I personally feel that reduces a risk of bias, and it actually addresses that concern of bias. So I think food for thought for you is to definitely look from a perspective of synthetic data, which is very easily available nowadays, and you can use that. So maybe you guys can want to add on.
And I was going to say that human overlay is not going to remove bias, right? Again, conscious of time, but if I had to take a stab at that, first of all, more on the corporate side, not on the retail side. So don't have full experience on retail's credit scoring models. And even within that, there's a difference between a fintech, which is not as closely regulated, and a bank, which will be, and therefore the level of explainability has to be of a very different kind. But I think, broadly echoing what you said, two things: synthetic data, yes. I think in our case, we would definitely require to have, even if the model is predicting, we would feed it 3-5 years of data. You would try to establish a high level of differentiation between the causality and the correlation, and try to come up with at least the kind of parameters that are making a difference to the decision or the scoring or the probability of default and so on and so forth. Now, if you are able to see a combination of factors, and ultimately it could be geography, it could be sector, it could be vintage of the company, etc. You try to take away the more sensitive topics around, but again, age, experience of entrepreneur, those things matter. Background may matter, but if it gets into those kind of things, then you probably need to figure out a way to control that. And the second thing is, in the financial services sector, whether it's on the retail side or on the credit side, given the regulations, whatever scoring models you come up with also are reviewed by regulators, shared with regulators, and agreed with regulators. And regulators in most of the progressive markets have very clear set of guidelines about what parameters we can or cannot consider. Now, the good news is the model can throw a few things out, and that is where the financial institution can take some discretion in terms of what it applies, but still work in progress. I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, I think the way that we've implemented our machine learning and AI overlay on financial decisions is really to look at anomaly detection. That's really where, you know, machine learning and AI and the deep learning NLP models actually come in, and they're incredibly good at spotting anomalies. So anomalies in data, when it comes to sort of financial algorithms, are incredibly important, and it's also a way of applying the technology in almost like a safe environment. If you've got millions and millions of rows of information to look through, actually searching through the anomalies and automating that process is incredibly easy for an AI and machine learning engine. So I would begin with that, or something along those lines, and then once you've got confidence in the model, then perhaps move that into a more risk-based model when it comes to approaching kind of the retail segments.
The only thing that I could add on that, because actually one of the things that I look after is the credit scoring component, is just given how new it is and how heavily regulated this industry is, the call that we've actually made is we're starting on the marketing side, because we're still learning, and whether or not you market or not market to somebody is not as, you know, whether I'm discriminating whether or not to give you a loan or not. So we're actually using that area to learn to understand these models and see how can you actually, you know, peel this onion and actually understand how it's making its decision, how you can get better transparency in that. And then as we get more confident and that comfortable that we can actually firstly internally explain it, but then secondly also comfortable to actually put that in front of a regulator. Just given how new it is, that's the approach that we've taken, is to get ourselves up that learning curve, but with something that's not as discriminatory as something like credit scoring.
We have one final question from Simon Gu.
Hi, good morning everyone. Just a quick question. So myself have been involved in the governance process as well, in establishing some of these governance criteria, and also technology development on AI over the last few years. So one of the interesting questions right now, depending on which discussion groups that you are in, it's really on algorithmic bias. Because obviously we have talked about a lot on data biases, which is a foregone discussion actually. But what about algorithmic bias that is inbuilt within the algorithms, right? Not much has been talked about. That's number one. How to address them. And number two, a lot of discussion is around open source codes as well. A lot. So about the community that is developing the open source codes. How risky are they? What sort of risk and controls are we going to have within financial institution regulations, etc.? So maybe some insights and your experience or perspective on that. I think, because these are the questions which I'm also trying to get over it. I think there's no straight answers to it, because obviously at that federal level, they are still trying to figure out what sort of risks are there within the open source community. They are not really incentivized to check your codes, probably less so than any one of us in this room. So via the white hackers and etc., you know, those sort of things. I think that is something we probably as a community needs to think deeper into that aspects. Thanks.
Yep, maybe I can go first. I mean, I think, you know, for us it's really about having a framework in your organization that makes sense for you. So I mentioned before, explainability, transparency, privacy and trust, auditability, fairness and bias, checks within the, you know, a framework that you can apply in your own organization. But I also think, you know, the sixth point is really about lifecycle management, and, you know, every single step of the way, from ingesting, whether it's, you know, sort of free sourced large language model from Happy Face, or whomever the, you know, the vendor is that you're seeking the data from. Having a lifecycle process within your organization that actually has that consistent iterative process that kind of goes through that framework to make sure that you're doing at least everything that you can in all possibility to make sure that you're not introducing you know, any bias into the data. And I would also say that, you know, in a lot of instances what's happening is you can consume a large language model. Once you buy it and you consume it, it's effectively yours. So whatever you do to it after that point, you're then responsible for evolving that large language model yourself. So in a way, you know, you can capture that moment in time and then continually evolve that large language model yourself. So that there are ways of architecting the systems to, you know, take a point in time data set, bring it into your organization, and then evolve it yourself, because you own that data effectively. So I think it's also about having that effective policy, you know, in terms of the way that you're adopting. But lifecycle management is absolutely key to make sure every single step of the way you're applying that philosophical framework to what you're doing, and prepared to change, right? Prepared to change. And I also think, you know, live data, because if you think about the problem that Google has, right, it's about, you know, when you look at trying to get a taxi or something like that, right, you're looking at a model which is effectively getting you from A to B. You're looking at live data, which is are there traffic lights or, you know, whatever, and then you're looking at the actual results and then feeding those live results back into the model to better tune it. So the users that you have that are using the system, you've got to be prepared to have an iterative approach to that as well. So again, you know, looking at problems that you're trying to solve and trying to apply those problems is equally, if not more important, to have live data being fed into those language models as you adapt as well, to make sure that is constantly evolving. Because it's not a point in time game here, right? It's an absolute, you know, it's a life cycle that you've got to go through with that data, and it always needs to evolve. So it's a very hard question to answer, but you know, I think there's ways around it that you can minimize, I think, the level of bias.